Hello and welcome everyone to today's session on regulatory compliance with Oracle Financial Services. My name is Nick Edmonds. I am a solution consultant with the Oracle Financial Services team. Prior to joining Oracle, I spent a number of years at State Street Bank in Boston, where I had a number of roles, including head of U.S. regulatory reporting and head of capital analytics and disclosure. Earlier in my career, I had many different roles within the lending space, including securitization and asset-based lending. So today we are here to talk about regulatory compliance. Now, the regulatory compliance landscape is exceedingly complex and continues to evolve. With every passing year, there are new regulations or new enhancements to existing regulations that banks are required to comply with in relatively short order. Beyond the complexity of the overall landscape, there are numerous different stakeholders which banks have to cater to with their regulatory compliance efforts. Internally, there are numerous players who care about the output of the various different exercises, including, as you would expect, the CFO, who typically has governance over the entire regulatory reporting architecture, but also the CRO, because Basel and liquidity risk management and loan loss forecasting and provisioning all have impacts on the risk management of the organization. Clearly, there's an interest from the CDO because all of these efforts require data, and obviously their line of business and other groups who have an interest because of the impact on their business. Beyond the internal stakeholders, there are a vast number of external stakeholders, and depending on the size and the complexity of the institution, banks can have numerous different regulators to which they have to adhere, adding complexity and broadening the scope of the different requirements. In addition to having numerous stakeholders and numerous different regulations, any individual regulation requires a great deal to achieve compliance. Typically, because the reports are at the parent company level, there's a need to aggregate data across the entire organization. That data must then be validated and reconciled to ensure it is fit for use. Then a series of stipulated calculations or transformations must be applied to that data. The data must then be mapped into any required templates. And then last but certainly not least, and especially important in the US in recent years, is a requirement for attestation from the CFO. The CFO attestation is a requirement that the senior leadership of the organization attest to the fact that their entire organization is adhering to best practices to ensure the accuracy and compliance of their regulatory processes. So what are the typical challenges we see across the industry? For the lion's share of institutions, the challenges relate to data sourcing and their existing and typically manual processes. So, very commonly, we see institutions with multiple disparate systems to handle their various different regulatory compliance efforts. These systems are collecting data from multiple different sources. They are doing calculations in systems or in spreadsheets, or using spreadsheets to aggregate the output of multiple systems, and from there massaging the data to meet the final reporting requirements. These types of processes commonly result in significant data issues, whether it be related to the consistency and the quality of the data, or in very commonly we see issues with traceability of the end-to-end data flow, or just the governance and control of that data flow. In addition, with manual processes such as Excel, you introduce the possibility of human error. Humans make errors. It's just a fact of life. And with manual processes, even the best institutions will have errors. Also, manual processes generally take longer than automated processes. So there can be issues of institutions managing to produce the reports by the filing deadline. And last but not least, with manual processes, there's the question of controls and governance. Is there sufficient oversight to ensure the necessary controls and to provide senior leadership the level of comfort they need to attest to their overall processes? So what are institutions trying to do in response to these types of challenges? Well, the headline items are what you might expect. Most institutions are attempting to automate their regulatory compliance processes as much as possible. The key goals of such such automation is to reduce cost and to ensure the timeliness and accuracy of their submissions. There is a hope to enhance the governance and traceability over their end-to-end process. And last but certainly not least, there's a hope that they can leverage their regulatory processes to gain insight into their business to help them with their decision making. And it's this last element that I think is a very exciting opportunity in this space. For a long time, institutions in financial services have viewed regulatory compliance as a necessary burden. As we've mentioned before, multiple reports, multiple regulators, strict deadlines. The requirements are constantly increasing in their breadth and complexity, and they're constantly changing. While this is all true, the work that is done to meet the regulatory requirements creates a lot of data and a lot of information that could be used to enhance strategic decision making. And that is only possible if there is sufficient control and automation around the regulatory compliance process to, first of all, allow time to do such analytics, but also there needs to be sufficient comfort in the quality and the accuracy of that end-to-end process to rely on it for strategic decision making. But there certainly are examples that spring to mind readily, such as optimizing use of limited resources, such as capital or liquidity. Understanding where your capital is being used, where your liquidity is being used, and if possible, transforming those into risk-adjusted measures to understand if you are getting the appropriate return on your risk, and so on and so forth. So this leads to what we call the balancing act, right? Banks in the current economic environment are in a precarious or a challenging situation where they have competing pressures from their equity holders. There is a desire for them to put their money to work. They want to see improved return on investment, and that typically requires increased net interest margin, which often results in increased risk. Contrary to this, there are the ever-expanding regulatory requirements, which would motivate a flight to safety. Regulatory capital ratios, liquidity ratios, leverage ratios can be binding factors for institutions as they make strategic decisions. And without enhanced understanding of the drivers of those ratios, you cannot have insight into where you have the ability to take on risk to enhance your return or improve your net interest margin. So OFSA Oracle Financial Services Analytical Applications has a large suite of regulatory compliance solutions specifically designed to address the needs of institutions in this space. We have solutions covering the risk modeling and their associated data. We have numerous risk measurement and management tools, including loan loss provisioning and for CECL or IFRS 9, liquidity risk management, Basel regulatory capital, including the Basel III post-crisis reforms, also known as Basel IV. And last but certainly not least, we support the regulatory report preparation and submission for numerous regulators across the globe. The typical architecture for the Oracle Financial Services regulatory compliance solution looks as we see here. On the far left, there are the data sources across the institution. They can be systems of record, existing data warehouses, data lakes, or even files where the data is then extracted into a common data model, this financial services data foundation here, where the data is standardized. A set of over 8,000 pre-configured data quality and validation checks can be applied to ensure that the data is fit for use. The data can then be processed by any of our engines, and then the results are captured in a dimensional model to allow them to be consumed by any regulatory reporting needs. Across the top, we see here the data governance and controls capabilities that would apply to the entire end-to-end process. Looking at this from a slightly different perspective, we can see here the overall set of capabilities that the Oracle Financial Services solutions for regulatory compliance deliver. Right? We have the data management capabilities to capture and aggregate or disaggregate all of the necessary data elements required for regulatory compliance, and depending on the specific regulatory use case of interest for the institution, we can provide predefined requirements. We need these specific data elements, and we need you to populate them to this specific location. As mentioned on the previous slide, we have pre-configured data quality checks and validations to ensure the data is fit for the ultimate use. We have numerous data processing engines, whether it be regulatory capital, liquidity risk management, regulatory reporting, whatever the use case may be, but these are pre-built engines that have the regulators' prescribed methodologies pre-built to allow institutions to automate the transformation of their source data through to the required output required by the institutions. The next two segments I will talk to in combination, the report submission and the analysis and insight. From the dimensional results layer that I mentioned on the previous slide, there are capabilities to do multiple different types of reporting, whether that is the required regulatory templates, which we have a pre-integrated solution to populate the latest version of the regulator's specific templates, execute any regulatory validations to ensure the reports are fit for submission and to prepare the actual submission files. But there's also the capability to do extensive analysis on those results, to drill down into the drivers, to understand the trends, and to perform attribution to see which lines of business, which products, or even which customers are driving those results. Last but certainly not least, in the current environment, there is the governance piece. So the suite of governance tools enabled by the Oracle Financial Services Regulatory Solutions enables process monitoring for the entire cycle, full visibility and transparency to the entire end-to-end data lineage from source all the way through to report, through all transformations and all calculations, with every adjustment to the data, whether it be by a process or by a user intervention, is logged and maintained for future review. So why does this matter? Well, the Oracle solution is the only end-to-end regulatory compliance solution on the market. There are numerous competitors who can offer various portions of the flow from left to right, the data preparation, the data manipulation, or the last mile reporting. And in some instances, there are institutions that can offer the end-to-end, but only for one narrow use case. The Oracle solution set can offer the full left to right flow across the full breadth of regulatory compliance use cases. And across all of those use cases, we ensure the timeliness and accuracy of your filings. We simplify the continuous compliance requirements by releasing at least quarterly updates to reflect the latest changes to the regulations by the regulators, including providing updates for proposed rulemakings to allow institutions to test the potential impact of new rules. We offer a governance studio that enables the industry best practice governance and control practices to ensure that auditors, whether they be internal, external, or from the regulator, can have full visibility into the end-to-end process. And last but not least, as I've mentioned, with the end-to-end process unified in one single location, there is enhanced management decision-making enabled by allowing deep analysis into the drivers of the reporting requirements. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. If you have any questions about further details about the specific use cases that Oracle supports or any details of the end-to-end process, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email shown below. Thank you very much for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.